Three, two, one. Mark Adams, you are the Chief Executive of Community Integrated Care. Welcome to the Care Home Show.
Thanks, Simon. Very nice to be here.
It's great to have you on the show. So before we get started, please can you tell me a little bit more about your background and then also introduce Community Integrated Care for me, please?
Yeah, with pleasure. I've had sort of over 35 years in healthcare. Started off working with the NHS and then sort of turned to the dark side and worked with the private sector for many years, working from sort of diverse organisations such as Virgin Healthcare, AXA PPP, DEM Plan, a stint for 10 years out in the Middle East running hospitals and clinics. And then to try and redeem myself, I came back 3 years ago and took over as Chief Executive of Community Integrated Care.
Thank you very much. And tell me a little bit more about Community Integrated Care.
Well, it's a charity that was set up sort of 32 years ago by a local GP in Cheshire. He had challenges providing care for his mother who was living with dementia and his daughter who had learning difficulties. And Dr. David Robertson basically founded the charity probably with no aspirations other than offering good local services to the people of Cheshire. Over the years, we've grown. About 25% of what we do is looking after older people, mainly living with dementia, through our care home network, or sort of 75% helping people with learning disabilities, with a total range of services of about 450, principally in England and Scotland.
Got you. Thank you very much. And you and some of your team recently appeared on Panorama's The Forgotten Front Line, which was aired just a couple of weeks ago. So, firstly, to my audience, I recommend anyone that hasn't already seen it to make sure that they go and watch it back on iPlayer. But for those who haven't seen it, can you tell the audience a little bit about what was covered in the episode?
Well, we spoke to the BBC really at the outset of COVID about telling the story of what frontline care workers are potentially going to have to go through. Neither they or we really had any idea of quite how dramatic some of the challenges would be. So I think it was almost 3 months we had the Panorama team camped out with appropriate PPE, safeguarding, social distancing, keeping largely away from the sort of clinical aspects of one of our principal dementia homes, but telling the story from where we had our first outbreak, how the interaction with the NHS worked or didn't work, how the team had to sort of raise their game, operating and dealing with areas that might have been picked up clinically in hospitals or with the support of visiting GPs in the past. And we weren't quite sure what the programme would tell, but we were very confident that the Each Step Care team in Blakely in Manchester would do a fantastic job, and that proved to be the case. What I don't think any of us realised was just how impactful and emotional this would be, where you saw people perhaps getting sick, obviously being cared for during their battle against COVID, and then sadly on a number of occasions losing that battle. The reaction of families, the reaction of our nurses and our care workers, and I think giving a very strong message that social care wasn't in its strongest position nationally in January prior to COVID, and to suddenly throw this challenge on an under-resourced system and ask them to effectively operate the same way as doctors and nurses were reacting in hospitals was a remarkable ask. And I think it's a testament to social care workers all over the country or countries of what a great job they've done.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the social care world has had a spotlight shone upon the amazing work that they do. If only the world knew that that was just what social care was all about, all day, every day, rather than just during COVID. That would be a great thing, of course, as well. But how did you feel about the tone of the episode of the Panorama documentary?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think most people live in fear of appearing on Panorama for the wrong reasons. So it was actually nice to be there telling a story that unfolded. I think that it basically shone a light on the inconsistencies between what the government have said through the last sort of 4 or 5 months about the Ring of Steel and equal priority with the NHS and the reality on the ground. And when you've got the juxtapositioning of how the NHS is operating and how social care is operating, and effectively how the teams were largely left alone to fight the crisis, I think it did tell the truth. And it's probably going to be a very useful sort of video recording of history that just says, when we look back on COVID, what could we have done better, and what do we need to do ahead of any COVID outbreak that might come in the autumn or next year. So I think generally I was pleased with the tone, and I think it did justice to what the teams went through.
I speak to an awful lot of managing directors and CEOs of care home businesses in every part of the country, big, small, private, charities, every different kind of iteration that you could possibly imagine. And I felt that the documentary gave a really honest, objective approach to the situation. And I think one of the things that Panorama is obviously one of its important jobs in the world is to uncover uncomfortable truths of things that are going on in the country. And the uncomfortable truth was the fact that the government didn't create a protective ring around care homes, unfortunately, despite what they said. And the NHS was prioritised, not once but just on an ongoing basis. So I think that, to your point, that's a timestamp of historical accuracy, if you like, that people will reflect on in the future. So I think it was very important. One thing that I think, obviously there have been stories on Panorama in the past which have been more pointed towards the failings in the care home environment, of course, as well. So one thing that I thought when I'd heard about the episode and that you'd been involved was the fact that it's quite a brave decision, of course, to open your doors at such an emotive time for the sector and for the nation as a whole. What made you personally want to do that?
Well, I mean, I'm really one of the new boys coming into social care, joining the charity 3 years ago. And having worked in different parts of the world, largely in either primary care, secondary care, or even in laboratory medicine, I haven't seen such a fragmented system before, such an underfunded system before, a system that relies on the goodwill and incredible contributions of 1.6 million social care workers, many of whom are on sort of minimum wage with no sickness benefits and other support. And I felt, and indeed the board felt, that this was going to be an opportunity to tell the story. You're absolutely right. When you let in journalists and they've got a virtually complete editorial freedom, we weren't sure whether this was going to be were any of our team at any time not wearing their masks properly, not donning and doffing PPE properly. Were there areas that we could have been held to criticism? But we were fairly confident that this was a team that were at the top of their game. We didn't know how COVID would impact them, but we felt that it was a chance to tell the story of social care. And I'd say 90% of our board were supportive, maybe 10% had reservations. And when we regrouped after Thursday night, I think everybody felt that in hindsight it was the right thing to do.
Well, I for one, I'm definitely glad that you did do it. When we first initially connected, I hadn't watched the episode, but I did watch it over the weekend. And well, for all of the reasons that we've talked about, I think it's great that Panorama were objective in their approach and very it laid the story bare, I think, in a very, very honest and realistic way, true to form of what I've certainly heard secondhand from the people that I've spoken to as well. So good on you for being brave enough to do that. I can imagine there's probably a certain amount of inner monologue even in yourself to think, is this the right thing to do? So I'm very happy that you did do that.
Thanks, Simon.
So one of the things that I know when we've spoken about this recently is just how proud you are of your team, and that one of the things that Panorama also shined a light on was the quality of the culture that you've built within the organisation itself. Tell me a little bit about I guess the best bits that you were maybe most proud of during the Panorama. The Panorama documentary and the whole outbreak, if you like, and how that's been kind of reflective of what other things have been going on within the group.
Well, I think that any organisation sort of succeeds or fails based on culture. What you really want is a team that's aligned behind the values of an organisation, working to a common sort of mission and purpose, and everybody feeling empowered to do their bit. I think too often social care, frontline care workers are really left to provide incredible support and care to the people that they're working with, but constantly ringing in their ears are they're low-skilled people. They are doing a relatively unimportant job, that they're not on a par with their colleagues in the NHS, and anyone in social care knows that is completely untrue, and that these people are the unsung heroes of society. The job of the executive team in an organisation like Community Integrated Care is not to kind of put in a command and control system where you have incredibly regimented systems that take the joy and the fun out of social care, because an awful lot of social care is about how do we help people have the best life they can have, and that's about empathy, understanding, being able to spot early signs if there's a problem building in someone's frustration or needing to de-escalate a situation. And I think all we've really tried to do is to say, okay, the executive team are at the bottom of a pyramid. Our job and all of our managers' jobs are to make sure that we give the tools, the training, the right working environment to allow people to deliver life-affirming care to the people that need a bit of extra support. And we've been working hard on that across the organisation for 3 years. This was meant to be a year of real growth and expansion. We had a couple of mergers planned. We had a couple of acquisitions planned. We were looking to roll out a new community-based dementia service. And we were turning the tide commercially. The charity was hopefully going to move into surplus for the first time in many years. And suddenly, all of those plans go out the window and you're in a firefight. I think 3 years ago, we would have been in a weaker position because we would have had sort of 450 separate services really fighting this alone. But over the last 3 years, we have become more of a family. We set up a war room in February and really took control of all the supply lines and said, look, we just want people on the front line focused on trying to keep COVID out the door and trying to maintain a good quality of life for the people they support. And our job is just to make sure that they don't have to worry about PPE, food, getting paid on time, any of the other issues that are clearly important. With the Panorama team specifically, every time I go into that service, I'm humbled by what they do. And I had absolute confidence that they would come through this with flying colours. I hadn't realised quite how emotional it would be. When I saw the rough cut 2 or 3 weeks ago of what was proposed to go out as the Panorama programme, I was sitting with a couple of my colleagues in tears in the boardroom, really just humbled by what our guys have done. But I know that we're not alone. That's social care up and down England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So, it's great thanks to everybody.
Yeah, definitely, without a shadow of a doubt. They they say you never know the true measure of a person until that person is tested. I think all of the people in health and social care have been challenged over the last kind of 4.5 coming up to 5 months with everything that's been going on. And one thing that I've been just astoundingly proud of is the resilience and just the grit, determination of the great people that make up this sector to do the right thing and to work hard and to focus on the things that need focusing on and make sure that people are kept safe and people are kept as comfortable as they can be in what has been obviously a pretty tumultuous time for everyone, ultimately, not least the people obviously in the social care system, if you like.
Yes, and I think what we all now want is that the lessons that have been learnt in terms of deficiencies of government leadership and getting the kind of logistics around PPE supply, testing, tracing, all of the emergency funding, that now needs to be really thought through and in place ahead of any sort of winter impact. Because clearly, we always have a difficult time with flus and illnesses that occur in the autumn and winter. That combined with COVID is going to really test a battle-weary army of social care workers who won't have fully recovered from what they've gone through so far. And if we're not ready as a country to support them, then it's going to be very tough. Definitely.
And the regular viewers and listeners to the podcast will know that one of the things that I'm most conscious of at the moment is people's mental health. I know that I've had some pretty hard days. I don't run services. I've just been working my behind off trying to support the sector in the way that I do. But I know I've had some times where I haven't exactly been in the best of shapes just because I've pushed myself too hard, trying to do too many different things at once. And again, I'm not on the front line. I'm not kind of bearing the brunt of what that looks like and feels like. And I'm conscious that on a personal level that I haven't been in the best shape. I can only imagine how that relates to the front line. People will be tired. People will need an opportunity to reconcile what has happened over the last few months, but also in the knowledge that we don't know what the future, of course, is going to hold. We are, it would appear, going to see a second spike. To what extent, obviously, we don't know at the moment. But there are obviously cities that are now back in lockdown. For how long? Let's see. Is this going to be a national thing? Really?
We don't know.
Who knows? It's shaping up that things are going in that direction, but we just don't know how big that second spike's going to be, and it's on everyone's mind, of course, at the moment.
I think again, harking back to the Panorama programme, one of the things it brought out very strongly is that whilst we've got a fantastic NHS and the doctors and nurses do an incredible job, they have the advantage really of emotional distance from their patients, because they are people who have an illness and the illness is being treated. They don't have the same emotional bond. And I think what Panorama and other stories have told is that, when you lose 25% of a care home's residents in the space of a week or 10 days, the loss is of people that you've become close to, friends, in some cases people that you've actually, you genuinely have affection for. And therefore the grief and the impact of those losses is that much more severe. So, that is also something that I think the public are just starting to really get their head around.
Definitely. So that being the case, I guess, given all that we've said so far, I guess, what do you believe that the future holds? I know that's somewhat of an expansive question, but just interested to hear kind of when you look out upon the horizon, what do you see?
Well, I mean, there are sort of short, medium and long-term issues that obviously we're all starting to think about. I mean, as a charity, we're looking at what the new normal for us will be. So, we're looking at speeding up technology projects that will transform how we can monitor our services remotely, how we can perhaps use technology to safeguard and support people remotely. We're looking at how our support functions work. Do they need to be in the buildings they used to be in? Because obviously we've had most of our support services operating from home lockdown, and they've done a fantastic job. All of our payroll services, financial reconciliations, purchasing, all of the key aspects of supporting a large operation have worked, if anything, better than they did before. So we're going to certainly be saying, are there better ways of working? We're seriously looking at whether a 4-day working week works better. So maybe people use what was previously their traveling time on a Monday through to Thursday to actually start slightly earlier and finish slightly later, and then have 3 days as a weekend, but still remunerated based on what they would have earned previously because they've done the same number of hours. We're looking at that as well on a rota basis on the frontline services. So I suspect that we will emerge a very different organisation in a few years, over the next few years. And obviously then you start to look at, if COVID is with us, how do we invest in new safety measures? So are there appropriate ways of having spray disinfectants as you walk through the door? Ways of which you disinfect your outer garments, locker rooms and showers before you get ready for the day's work, and then you do the reverse process on the way home. How do we get our key frontline workers into work where we minimize their contact on public services? What do we do in terms of using fogging and UV light and regular cleansing of the buildings, just to be constantly vigilant to try and fight against COVID? And that might be something, if there isn't a vaccination, that we just have to live with. And then of course you've got the whole argument and discussion around the future of social care. We hope that we're now making the case that you can't carry on with 1.6 million people being so disadvantaged financially against their peers. How do we perhaps also have more central accountability? It doesn't mean that you need to have the National Health Service take over social care, but do you end up with a National Care Service that's centrally structured in terms of a point system on eligibility for care, career pathways for social care workers, minimum sort of remuneration packages, and career progression that reflects as you gain more experience, how this becomes a profession that we can encourage more and more people into. But maybe that's delivered locally by local authorities, but the local authority knows that they can calculate based on a formula, and that's the cost of what they need to pay for. At the moment, it's a lottery, it's a patchwork quilt, and with 408 local authorities all interpreting the rules themselves, it just doesn't help the system normally, and in a crisis, it just doesn't work.
Mm. You mentioned local authorities there. What's your experience been like because obviously you've got pretty much national coverage with the number of services that you've got, of course. What's been what's your experience been like? I guess what's the variation been like throughout the organisation?
I mean, you've got I guess a curate's egg. You're in a situation where some have been absolutely fantastic. Some local authorities have said, right, we want to immediately put pay rates up to real living wage. We want you to pay full sick pay if people are self-isolating or if they're ill. We want to help you to invest in the necessary safeguards with extra measures to protect the people you're supporting. And then we've had others that have had sort of zero proactive contact, have refused to help financially, still, as you say, 4 or 5 months into the crisis, having not really transferred any supporting capital as per the government instructions. And I think that overall, we've had to create an army of administrators to process the paperwork and the claims and to provide information, not quite 408 times, but not far off that. And there has to be a better system. I mean, at this time, all of the focus should be on safeguarding people in a care environment. And we've had an absolute army of administrators just making sure we answer questions and put in invoices and try and collect payments, some of which has worked and some of which hasn't.
No, I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine. So if you were to think maybe idealistically, if you like, what a new social care sector system could look like, in your mind, what does that need to look like for it to work and for it to work well?
I mean, obviously you've got a Secretary of State for Health and Social Care at the moment, but whenever Matt Hancock is challenged, he basically says, look, I can't intervene, it's not my responsibility, it's the local authority's responsibility. And I just think that is a cop-out. If you've got a government with an 80-seat majority, you can do whatever you like. And I think what we should be looking at is, okay, we want reform. We want to make sure that we give people certainty about if you've got an elderly parent that needs care and support with dementia, or if you've got a child that you've looked after with autism, but they've grown a little too big and you've got a little bit too old and you need to have the care system supporting you. There's got to be a formula that is easier for people to understand when they are and when they aren't eligible for state support. There then needs to be equality between those care workers working in the NHS that can be on sort of £11.50 an hour, and those that are on £8.72 in the private charitable sort of third sector, where they're doing exactly the same job, but many of whom operate on 0-hour contracts, people without sickness benefits, people without appropriate abilities to save towards retirement. So I'd like to see a national care service where you perhaps take the social care team out of the NHS, you put them into a building under direct leadership, responsible and reporting into the Secretary of State for Health. You develop a formula that shouldn't be beyond the wit of man as to what we want people to be able to rely on in terms of guidance of support from the state. And then you need to decide what part of that is funded through central government alongside the NHS, and what part of that needs to be through local taxes, through local authorities. But the local authorities are between a rock and a hard place because they've been under cutbacks for 10 or 20 years. They've got to manage the whole system of local government. And when their budgets are being cut year on year, it's very hard for them to then fund the rising cost of healthcare demand in social care. So I think if you could turn around and say there's a formula, and one way or other the central government tops up the local government, that would be as much of a relief for local government as it would be for providers operating in it. Yes, it's going to cost more money, and I think we're going to have to tackle the thorny issue of increased taxation if we want to look after our elderly and vulnerable. But I think that if we asked most people in society, do we want a health and social care system that we can rely on, I think the vast majority of us would agree with that.
I would certainly say so. I think one of the things that I think about quite a lot is the fact that people typically they more or less get healthcare. They understand the way that it works, and if they don't, they can be relatively easily signposted towards how to understand what that landscape looks like. I think one of the big challenges is the fact that people don't really understand why social care is important from a societal perspective. I don't really think that everyone understands exactly what it does, and I don't think that people understand how it integrates with the wider healthcare system. And I think one of my concerns is that until a suitable amount of people, and that's members of the public, have that kind of level of appreciation, until that point it doesn't become a vote winner. And if it doesn't become a vote winner, then it's the can that gets kicked down the road again and again and again and again.
And I think that's exactly what we have seen and why we're in the situation that we're in. I believe COVID is changing that. I mean, people who have issues with loved ones needing support very quickly get to understand the strengths and weaknesses of the social care system. At the moment, there are 850,000 people living with dementia. We know over the next 20, 25 years, that's going to go up to over 2 million. So, there is going to be a huge growing number of families who are acutely aware of the impact of that one condition. Throughout the COVID crisis, we've seen a very slow reaction from central government, but a gradual reaction to support care homes, but virtually no reaction to support extra care units or supported living homes around the country. And that hasn't really had the spotlight it deserves. But I think that if we're in a situation where we want an integrated healthcare and social care system, this should be about taking the frail elderly out of hospitals where they should never have been in most cases, and getting them looked after appropriately in the community. It's about how do you work with care homes, extra care units and such like, where if people are ill, the default position isn't necessarily you immediately move them into hospital. How do you care for them appropriately in situation? And I think a proper integrated health and social care system would be a much better way of working with primary care GPs, local acute trusts, the social care sector, with joined up thinking. Most local authorities, acute trusts, primary care systems, CCGs, have at best a cursory relationship with their social care providers. And as we found out through COVID, when you suddenly have a massive crisis, nobody knows what to do because it hasn't worked together historically. So why would it suddenly work together in a crisis?
Mm. Okay, so the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, obviously that's part of his title, whether he chooses to do anything about it or not. Like, in your view, what do you believe, where does his reticence come from to engage upon the subject matter, to not kind of bat off when he's questioned, and to be able to try and make some really positive moves towards actually making that whole integration piece work, at least on some level, better than it is today?
I think it all boils down to money. I mean, you've got effectively the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's got a worn out carpet to his desk with, every department lead constantly coming in saying we need more money for education, for the military, for transport, for whatever. Healthcare is one of the largest budgets, over 120 billion a year is scary already. If you take that dementia number, at the moment, if you're looking after somebody for the last couple of years of their life in a state-funded care home, you're looking at about £30,000 a year of cost. If you go to a private operator, you could be looking at 3 times that in terms of people that self-fund their dementia care. Well, if you take the 2 million people that are going to be there in 20 years' time, that's going to cost, in today's money, 70 billion a year. So, you're not far from doubling the NHS costs if you properly fund health and social care. So I think that, it's a kind of Pandora's box that the Secretary of State is wary from opening, because unless you are prepared politically to run the gauntlet of increased taxation, then you know that you're going to have to fund an enormous gap. And if you go into that area intending to tackle it, then you also have to tackle the taxation issue. And I think that's always been the barrier. We're in a situation at the moment where it's the local government's responsibility, and that's a comfortable place for the Secretary of State to keep it. Once it becomes his or her responsibility, then it becomes very much more uncomfortable.
Do you think it's so within that, do you think it's almost a case of, well, not on my watch, so I'll be the next one to kick the can down the road, and I'll just let one of my colleagues in the future have to deal with that one?
Well, you obviously had the Prime Minister Boris Johnson saying through the election campaign that within 90 days of taking office, they'd start the process for reform for social care. So I think it's getting to the point now where it's very much harder to kick the can down, because the public are more aware of it. If we are going to continue to live with COVID, and I think there's a good chance that there isn't a vaccine that works the way that is a magic solution, then this is going to stay an increasingly high political topic in a way that it has never been before. But I think that we saw with the last leader of the Conservative Party, Theresa May, when she had a kind of ill-judged, ill-thought-through plan to try and use your life savings or your domestic residence as an asset to pay for dementia care, it almost cost them the election. It certainly cost them a big majority. So this is politically a very tricky map to navigate through. But I think we're at the point where ducking it is equally as difficult.
It certainly feels like it's coming to a crunch point. The thing that keeps on going through my mind is, if not now, when? It's been the can has been kicked down the road for way before my time in the social care world. What needs to happen for things to change? That's just something that kind of goes around my head quite frequently.
And I think that this is really a shout out to all leaders of social care enterprises. We're not going to get the reform we need by continuing to be fragmented, continuing to paddle our own canoe and have myriads of conversations separately. This now needs to be collective, unified, sensible economic debate where we try and create a solution where we're sitting around the table, we're being pragmatic, we recognize not everything can happen overnight, but we should do it together. I think that, with 450,000 care homes, 850,000 people in supported living, most of those run by relatively small organizations. We're not going to bring about change individually. It's got to be done collectively.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I mean, obviously you're in the not-for-profit world, so I'm guessing you spend a lot of time with working with Vic Rayner and her team. Of course, you've got the great work of Care England, of course, and Professor Martin Green, and then there are obviously a handful of other organisations that work within kind of different kind of iterations of, if you like, of the whole kind of social care sector. That message is being driven home by all of these various different people all of the time. It's a drum that just needs to continue to be hammered, if you like. Do you think there's a way that could be? You talked about kind of the unified approach and things, if you like. Do you think that there's a way that we can to spearhead things as we talk at the moment? Is there any opportunity to be able to do things differently from that perspective, do you believe?
I mean, I've got a couple of thoughts. I mean, I think the sector needs to consolidate further. I think there are too many very small operations which have been tested to the extreme through COVID. And I think that, if we want to have a social care system that it is comparable to the National Health Service, then, you might eventually over time need that to be, 30, 50, maximum of 100 or so, general organizations with a number of specialized service providers on top. I think that when you have tens of thousands of operators, it's very easy to divide and conquer. I mean, you mentioned Martin Green and Vic Rayner and others. I think they've all worked incredibly hard during COVID. There has been an increasingly unified sort of set of opinions coming out, and certainly I don't think there's a massive gap between any of the trade associations and what they would like to eventually see. But it would obviously help if we could harness the families of the people we support, with the millions of people that we look after in the social care sector, if we could gather their families as an army behind us fighting for change, if we could, rather than fight trade unions, actually work with them, where the trade unions are not complaining about what the sector pays in salaries. It tackles the government to make sure the money is there to pay the salaries that the teams deserve. And if you could unify families, operators, unions with a common message and a common set of demands, then I think it becomes very hard for the government to duck that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a strength in numbers game, I guess, and I do feel that the people are becoming more and more focused on that message and trying to communicate it as much as possible. There's a lot of work to be done, but I think that's one thing that the sector has done tremendously well, is to collaborate, to come together, to try and work together to get through this, because we're stronger together. I think one of the things that I've always been really, really big on is collaboration within the sector. There's so many great things that happen around the country, but for whatever reason, those ideas, those concepts, those strategies, they can get siloed. But I do think that we're entering into, and I've seen this even in my relatively short space in the social care world. I've seen more and more push around open-mindedness, collaboration, and to your point, I think the message it's pretty consistent with what's being said across the board. These are the things that need to happen, and this is going to be the benefit of doing so. So, still plenty of work to be done, though, of course.
I think if you look at the back office costs of social care, with so many separate organisations with their own finance functions, their own HR functions, training functions, technology functions, you are taking a lot of resource that would be better spent on the front line. The more amalgamation you get, the more efficiency you get, and I think that helps reduce the cost. One of the things that the COVID crisis has done is it's brought lots of organisations together in forums. I mean, I must be on 3 or 4 forums that meet weekly. And at the start of this crisis, I was a relative newcomer to the sector, not really knowing my peers. 4 or 5 months in, I've made a lot of new friends. I'm working collaboratively with a number of organisations. Some of the stuff that we're doing on technology or people policies, or even things specific such as visitor policies in care homes and supported living, we're now sharing this, and we're cutting down on the duplication. And I think that has to be a really healthy sort of silver lining that's coming out of this, that we are already starting to be sort of slightly more collaborative.
Mm-hmm. And I think that can only be a good thing. I think if one operator's doing something and it's working great, that can be shared, then that's a win for that. Then that's a win for everyone. I think if it would be fair to say that from the people that I've spoken to that have been in the sector for many, many years, I don't think it has always been that way. Somebody would come up with a great idea, and it would be going to put my arms around it and make sure that I can't kind of share it with anyone else. But yeah, it would appear that we are shifting towards a more open-minded approach to things, which can, again, I believe that it can only be a good thing for the sector as a whole. So, as obviously having experienced what you've experienced over the last few months, if you like, as we draw to the close of the episode, what things would you like to share, I guess, to your most of the people, or a lot of the people that will be watching this will be fellow CEOs, managing directors, other senior people within the sector. What would you say your kind of words of wisdom are to share with people of like mind who are also striving to achieve the best that they can in such crazy and dynamic set of circumstances?
I mean, I don't think it's so much me patronizing my peer group by attempting to give my words of wisdom. I mean, I think I'd thank everybody for the battle that they and their teams have been through. I think that we have generally shown the best of social care. We haven't necessarily seen the best of political leadership, but maybe we've made it more uncomfortable, where the government has to up its game ahead of what we might face later on. I would just encourage collaboration. I'm now sort of regularly chatting to new CEOs who I haven't met before. Very happy to share any aspect of what we're working on if there's anything that helps other people refine their thinking. And I'm not too proud to plagiarize anybody else's good ideas. So I would just urge that we've got social care on the move. I think that the government are being backed into a corner where they are going to have to reform us for the better of the people we support. And let's just keep up the pressure and work together in doing so.
And I think on that note, I can't think of a better way to wrap the episode up. So, Mark, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for your time today on the Care Home Show. And maybe in a few months' time, we can pick things up again and see where we are then.
Thanks a lot, Simon.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.